when we were in the early stages of our relationship, Harrison cut his own hair. He did not cut his own hair well, but he cut his own hair.
Man, it
And
was
so,
fine.
no, he looked terrible, ladies. Like, I was like, I don't know if I can do it. Like, if this hair doesn't change, I don't know if we can continue. So, but yeah, so one day he's cutting his hair in the bathroom and he was like, hey, can you just like hit the back? And I was like, oh no, I don't know how to cut hair.
Right, because I would use like buzzers and I could see everything on the sides and the top, so I could like do that. But I can't see the back by the neck.
Okay, but let me tell you something right now. If a black man knew that you didn't know how to use some clippers, you cannot approach the head. Like, you cannot approach. And so when he was like, yeah, just hit the back, I said, I don't really know how to do that. He said, no, it's fine. Just like, you just kind of go up.
Just kind of blend it a little bit.
Ladies, I was like, this is a cultural moment right now, because I'm telling you right now, I asked like 3 black dudes, like, hey, would you let me just line you up real quick if I didn't know how to? He was like,
Resounding no
hell
from all.
no, hell no is the answer that you get.
Our stories are what make us unique, but they're also what connect us as human beings. It's time to stop talking and start listening. This is You Talk, I'll Listen with Shannon Chapman. On this episode, we're going to be talking about something that was illegal in a lot of places until 1967, which is not that long ago. That is interracial marriage. I have with me Taren and Harrison, and they are an interracial couple. Taren is black, Harrison is white. Can you guys tell me a little bit about what your life was like before you met each other?
Sure, I'll start. So, like you said, I'm white, and I grew up in the suburbs of Minnesota, which is the equivalent of me saying that like I grew up in a sea of white people, right? So, like I had Asian friends, but even my Asian friends were probably culturally like pretty similar in a lot of ways. I grew up in a family that was pretty conservative. I mean that both in terms of their like religious beliefs, right? Conservative Christian, evangelical, but also politically, like Republican, all that kind of stuff. In a lot of stereotypical, well, I guess not stereotypical, because most people when they think like stereotypical, like Christian or stereotypical Republican, they'll think like very like hateful. But I would say that like for me, my parents and even my extended family never really spoke negatively about people who looked different than us. And I would hope that most people who are Christian would be like that, right? The idea of being a Christian is that you look more like Christ as time goes on. So I think, as is true for a lot of white families, people who are in the majority culture, growing up, race wasn't a super common topic. Again, if you're growing up around white people, what's there to talk about? Like, it's not something that you encounter on a regular basis. Whereas if you're black, you might be reminded on a daily basis that you're black. And as a white kid growing up, I rarely thought about the fact that I'm a white guy, right? So yeah, grew up in suburban Minnesota, which super white.
I'm Taren, and I grew up in super white suburban Alpharetta. So I always had a group of black friends that are still my rocks to this day. But in terms of culturally, I would say that, I knew a lot about how to be the only, spot in the room. And so I don't find myself uncomfortable around people who look different than me, because that's just what I grew up around. Also grew up in a Christian loving home. My dad grew up on the south side of Chicago, though, so race was a common topic, and how to interact with people that don't look like you, or interact with the police, like just things that you hear. Even the stories that my dad used to tell about how he grew up and the racism that he experienced, shaped a lot of how I thought, white people might think of me as a black woman. But I never really had any personal issues with racism. I mean, I think I got called the N word in 4th grade one time, right? And one time is too many, but it wasn't something it wasn't an often occurrence in my life. And so one of the things that my parents taught me that I think really stuck with me, though, is that when you're choosing a partner, what's in their heart is what's most important. And so I think that really set the stage for Harrison and I's relationship now. Just knowing that what's most important to me is who he is as a person, what's in his heart, whether our values align, not necessarily the color of his skin.
So, how did you guys meet?
So I I would love to tell a different story, but unfortunately, we met on a dating app called Coffee Meets Bagel. My friends convinced me to get on over Christmas break, and Harrison's friends convinced him to get on. And I was on for about 2 weeks. He's the first person I matched with, asked me on a date, and I said yes, and now he's my husband.
Yeah, ask her if I was the last person that she matched with.
He is still salty about the fact that I was not his girlfriend, and I was still, swiping left and right. I don't see what the problem was.
Yeah, so we were 27 years old when we met, and I remember being super excited for our first date. So we met, talked back and forth, and then we had our first date. And I would say that basically from the get go, there was a really strong connection. Went on a date. We actually, just for context, we probably dated for a little over a year, then got engaged. We were probably engaged for a little under a year. After we were married, we've been married for about 3 years now. We've got a daughter; she's a year old. Um, and yeah, I would say the progression of our relationship just like flowed. At no point did I feel like we were moving too fast, or at any point did I feel like it was going too slow. Like it was really good. We had a little bit of early on in our relationship where it was long distance. Um, for about a month, I was out of the country, and yeah, it was even when we were long distance, the communication piece, the getting to know each other piece, it wasn't that difficult, I would say.
Had you guys dated outside of your race before?
I had never been in an official relationship. Like, I had gone on a date with somebody who didn't look like me, but I had never been in a like true committed relationship that had depth to it in any way.
Yeah, same. I think I had gone on a date with a black girl before, but never in a relationship.
Do you find that people treat you differently when you're out and about your family? Are there people who seem to have issue with it?
I'm only laughing because something literally happened this last week. Um, I would say in general, no. The overwhelming response that we get from obviously friends and people that we encounter is positive. But you have some really dumb stuff that happens. I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, he's being too nice about it. So let me start at the beginning. One, being out at restaurants and people like looking at us, it'll be just Harrison and I. We're clearly both have our wedding rings on, flirting with each other, most likely holding hands. And for the waitress at the end of the night to come over and ask, "Do you want separate checks?" is like, "Excuse me?" Like, this is my husband. I don't understand. Like, read the table. I don't know. Or, what goes through my mind is, are you asking every table? Would they like a separate check? And you're probably not. You're making assumptions about who you think is together and who's not together.
Yeah, I don't know what the data is, but I've definitely asked my friends if they've encountered this, like other people who are same race couples. Do you ever get someone asking you like, "Hey, do you want a split check?" And they're like, "No, never." So I would assume that that's what's going on with
Mhm.
us.
Yeah. And I think, as Harrison said, like on our way here, we were on a plane with our daughter. Obviously it's COVID. And so they typically leave the middle seat open on Delta. But we're a family, so we're sitting in the same row. Daughter's in the seat. I'm in the middle seat. Harrison's standing in front of his aisle seat, and the flight attendant walks by and just says, "Sir, are you sitting here?" To which he says, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, are you guys together?" To which he said, "Yes." And she's like, "Oh, okay, because if not, I was gonna say we like to spread out seats on the plane." What? You don't see that we're a family? We legit have the most interracial, like mixed baby looking, like mixed looking baby ever. And so for you to look at my daughter, myself, and Harrison, and then say, "Oh, they're not together. Let me make sure I ask a question here," to me is completely outrageous. And there was another family sitting 2 rows behind us that I think they were all black. She didn't ask them anything. So there's just not, you're not treating everybody the same. You're not asking the same questions. You're making assumptions in your mind about who's together and who's not. And I think oftentimes interracial couples will run into situations where people just don't assume that you're together, which is hurtful, to be honest with you, in 2020.
Do
Yeah.
you find that when you have those issues, that it's one type of person, or is it kind of a mix?
Yeah, I mean,
They're overwhelmingly white, but
Yeah.
we also live in Minnesota, which is overwhelmingly
Overwhelmingly
white.
white.
So
Yeah, I think that I don't think that people have these negative intentions. I don't think that they are like hardcore racists that are trying to make a statement. I think it's just people being naive to the fact that couples come in all different shades, whatever, and so they're just not thinking about it. But I don't think that your intent excuses you from like how it makes someone else feel. And so I think it's just about like I would want people to just think twice, like assess the situation, pay more attention before you ask a question or make an assumption. I think that's what we would ask as a couple. But at the end of the day, I think it probably bothers me more than it bothers Harrison, just as a Black woman, like encountering racism and just being like, here we go again, where he is able to just kind of like rub it off, like shake it off his shoulder a little bit easier than I can. But I think that's just the story of being a minority in this country. So,
right,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very like conflict avoidant, and I'm also just probably a little bit aloof because of like my upbringing. So I don't notice things as much, or I'll just like assume that they meant something else when they probably didn't.
I wonder, because you guys are in Minnesota, I guess it depends on where in Minnesota you're from. But
Yeah, we aren't in like rural Minnesota where we'd probably have a different experience. We live in St. Paul, and so being in an urban environment, a fairly progressive state, probably changes our experience than if we were to live somewhere else.
yeah, I wonder if you were in the South, if your experience would be the same or if it would be different.
no, I think we often ask ourselves that question, just knowing that my parents live here and it's something that we're considering moving to Atlanta, but it's something that we think about, like what would be the impact on our family, Harrison and I, but also our daughter, who's biracial. So it's definitely something we think about, and we feel fairly safe within Minnesota. But I think you always get the you know people just not necessarily knowing what to make of you as a couple, but whether it's friends, family. I've had when I first met Harrison, a really good friend of mine text me after I posted that I was dating him, and I put a picture up, and her first question for me was, "So tell me about this cream in your coffee." And not, "Hey, who is Harrison? Who is he? What's his heart? What do you guys have the same values? Like, where's he from? Is he treating you well?" The only thing she wanted to know is, "Tell me about this white guy that you're dating." And so I think that you know, it just kind of is what it is. It's not some people are used to it, some people are not used to it, and so the way that they react to you, I think a lot of times is based on their personal experience.
Now, I was going to ask you, how did your family and your friends react when you guys first started dating?
Yeah, I would say overall very supportive. So from my experience, getting to know Taryn and her family, like her mom, for example, super loving woman. Like not a super like warm personality, but like a very loving like person. And she made me feel welcome right away. Um, there was, I think, a little bit hesitation for some people. Like I remember you talking about like your family was like, well, how does he treat you? And maybe asking questions that they wouldn't ask about our relationship if I was a black man. And I remember even my grandma, my grandma's super sweet, but she just asked this question like, so how does she treat you? And I don't think that my grandma like meant anything. Like it was probably nothing, but it
Well,
was
she
literally,
also asked if I was Norwegian, and I was like,
yeah, she was over at 90 at the time. So her mental clarity may have been,
Yeah.
meh.
I was like, "Are there black Norwegians? Maybe there are. I've
There-
just never met one."
No, no. Oh, there's that kicker. Maybe I think there's an NFL kicker who might be a black Norwegian.
But no, yeah, I think that the questions that people had were probably different for me, given the fact that Harrison was white. Um, but to me, what was most important was who he was as a person, and um, what was in his heart. And so some of those questions were kind of like, you kind of brush it off. But a lot of people, I think, they just assume that Harrison and I wouldn't have as much in common. And the reality of the situation is that we actually have a lot in common. It's not saying we're the same people. No two people are the same, but we had a very similar experience growing up. We like a lot of the same things. I don't know. So it's
we definitely have more in common than not, most likely. Like I think that there's probably a lot of white people that I have less in common with than I do with Taren.
To hear the rest of this conversation in the mic drop moment, go to your favorite podcasting app and follow the You Talk, I'll Listen podcast. Or check the details below for a link to the hosting site. Grace and blessings.